Hi everybody, Rhonda and Jack Pockins. We're back again with another Guinea Pig story time, and as promised, we will be reading this time the first Guinea Pig classic that we have here, A Guinea Pig, Pride and Prejudice, based on Jane Austen's novel. Basically centers around the guinea pig Bennet sisters in this version, looking for love in 19th century England. For our younger audience, you'll probably have the good fortune of reading it when you get a little older. For our older audience, hopefully it is maybe one of your favorites, and I'm not sure how dramatic my reading will be. I am not trained for drama at all, but it is one of my favorite novels. I was an English major in college, so this is, all of the Guinea Pig classics are near and dear to my heart. So well, something to start us off here. I also want to mention that all of the guinea pigs, all of the cast are actually lady pigs. So all the male characters are portrayed here by our lovely lady pigs of the Guinea Pig Classic series. And we will be reading volume 1 today. This is a little bit of a longer book, so we're going to split it up into 2 or 3 story times. So we're starting with volume 1, Netherfield Park. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Netherfield Park had been taken by a certain Mr. Bingley, a single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. Mrs. Bennet, who had 5 unmarried daughters, was greatly excited by the arrival of Mr. Bingley in the neighborhood. By all accounts, he was young, wonderfully handsome, extremely agreeable, and, to crown the whole, he meant to be at the next ball. To be fond of dancing was a certain step towards falling in love, and very lively hopes of Mr. Bingley's heart were entertained. It is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them. These are Mrs. Bennet's lovely piggy daughters. Give you a little close up there. Did you lose your nibble? Here you go. Okay. But at the ball, it was his friend Mr. Darcy who soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, and the report, which was in general circulation within 5 minutes after his entrance, of his having 10,000 a year and a large estate in Derbyshire. Mr. Bingley was good looking, but Mr. Darcy was much handsomer, a fine figure of a man. Mr. Darcy was looked at with great admiration for about half the evening, till he slighted Elizabeth Bennet by refusing to dance with her. She is tolerable, he said, but not handsome enough to tempt me. He was the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world, and everybody hoped that he would never come there again. But as their acquaintance grew over time, Mr. Darcy began to find that Elizabeth's face was rendered uncommonly intelligent by the beautiful expression of her dark eyes. In fact, Darcy had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was by her. He really believed that were it not for the inferiority of her connections, he should be in some danger. What painter could do justice to these beautiful eyes? Yet despite his burgeoning affection, Darcy soon found himself quarreling with Elizabeth. "Your defect," said Elizabeth, "is a propensity to hate everybody." "And yours," Darcy replied with a smile, "is willfully to misunderstand them." Elizabeth found him proud and haughty, and Darcy wisely resolved that he would not even look at her. By tea time, however, it was clear that Mr. Bingley and Jane Bennet were in love. Bingley was full of joy and attention for Jane. He talked scarcely to anyone else. Some days later, the Bennets set off on a walk to Meryton with Mr. Collins, a visiting cousin who was eager to improve his acquaintance with Elizabeth. "I am happy on every occasion," Mr. Collins told Elizabeth, "to offer those little delicate compliments which are always acceptable to ladies." You are just chowing down here today, huh? They were introduced to Mr. Wickham, who had come from town to accept a commission in the corps. He had all the best part of beauty, a fine countenance, a good figure, and a happy readiness of conversation. All were struck with the stranger's air. All wondered who he could be. The party was increased by the unexpected arrival of Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley. Darcy was beginning to determine not to fix his eyes on Elizabeth when they were suddenly arrested by the sight of Wickham. Elizabeth, happening to see the countenance of both men as they looked at each other, was all astonishment at the effect of the meeting. Both men changed color. One looked white, the other red. What could be the meaning of it? It was impossible to imagine. It was impossible not to long to know. When they chanced to be alone together, Mr. Wickham told Elizabeth the history of his acquaintance with Mr. Darcy. "We played together as children," he said. "Mr. Darcy's father was my godfather and bequeathed me the best living in his will, but when the living fell, Darcy gave it elsewhere." Wickham shook his head. "Darcy was jealous of his father's uncommon attachment to me. Pride has often been his best friend. The fact is that we are very different sort of men, and that he hates me." Here are Darcy and Wickham as young pigs playing together. "The greatest part of our youth was passed together, inmates of the same house, sharing the same amusements." Elizabeth honored Wickham for his noble refusal to expose Darcy's villainy to the world, and thought him handsomer than ever. "Mr. Wickham is the most agreeable man I ever saw," she thought. "How am I to know that it would be wisdom to resist?" But before she could think of marrying Wickham, Mr. Collins surprised her with a proposal of marriage. "Nothing remains but for me to assure you in the most animated language of the violence of my affection." Mr. Collins was refused, though with no little difficulty, but he soon recovered and married Elizabeth's best friend Charlotte, who was not at all romantic and only asked for a comfortable home. Mrs. Bennet, however, was less phlegmatic. Miss Lizzie, if you take it into your head to go on refusing every offer of marriage in this way, you will never get a husband at all. And that brings us to volume 2, which we will be back with in a couple of days. We'll see if we can get through 2 and 3 in the next reading, and then maybe move on to a Guinea Pig Oliver twist. So we hope you enjoyed the first volume of our first Guinea Pig Classic reading, A Guinea Pig Pride and Prejudice. And enjoy your day, and we'll be back in a few days. Take care, guys.